Indirect calorimetry measures within plus or minus 1% of the direct method and does not require a special chamber. Indirect calorimetry measures your breath, specifically the oxygen that you use and the carbon dioxide that you exhale. So how does this work? Recall that during metabolism, oxygen is used and carbon dioxide is produced. Oxygen is needed to produce ATP during rest and during slow to moderate intensity exercise. At the same time, as you break down stored fuels in your body for energy, you produce a product called carbon dioxide. And carbs, fats, and protein all have different amounts of oxygen that is needed to fully break them down for energy, meaning that different amounts of carbon dioxide and oxygen in your breath can indicate the type of fuel that you are burning. On average, about 5 calories are burned for every 1 liter of oxygen that you consume. So putting this all together, we actually know how many calories you are burning and from which macronutrient. This is done by calculating what is called the respiratory exchange ratio, which is calculated by dividing the amount of carbon dioxide produced or exhaled by the amount of oxygen that you consume or inhale. Values range between 0.7 and 1.0. Even though things like hyperventilation or excessive acid buffering in the cells can skew this ratio a bit, it does give an excellent estimation of fuel use. For example, if you are burning mostly carbohydrates, your RER would be 1.0, the top of the range. An RER of 1.0 is equivalent to about 5 calories per liter of oxygen that you consume. This would occur while exercising very hard. Now, if you're burning mostly fat, your RER would be lower at 0.7, which is equivalent to about 4.7 calories per liter of oxygen consumed. This would occur while resting and while lying around. But most people tend to eat a mix of fuels from carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And as a result, people don't usually burn just carbohydrates or just fats. So the RER for this scenario will be right in the middle of 0.7 and 1.0, with a value of about 0.85, or 4.86 calories per liter of oxygen, indicating that you have a mixed use of fuels. Because protein is not used nearly as much as carbohydrates and fats for energy production, it is not pinpointed on the RER scale. We can also calculate exactly how much fat or carbohydrate you oxidize using standard scientific equations. All right, so what does this mean for you? Well, by understanding how much or what type of fuel you are burning for energy, you have a good idea of energy expenditure, which you need with your calorie intake in order to calculate your overall energy balance and primary nutrient needs for your lifestyle. Even better, you will also have a huge advantage from knowing how the foods you eat impact this balance and ultimately why and how eating and exercising contribute to your body composition. Knowing that the average woman weighs 156 pounds or 71 kilograms, let's use that as an example now to calculate her energy expenditure using indirect calorimetry. Well, at rest, about 3.5 milliliters of oxygen are consumed per minute. So to learn how much oxygen she uses every hour, we multiply 3.5 milliliters times 60 minutes. So she uses 210 milliliters of oxygen per hour. Then we multiply her oxygen use by her weight in kilograms, which is 71. So 210 milliliters times 71 kilograms equals about 15,000 milliliters, or 15 liters of oxygen per hour. Then, multiplying this out over 24 hours, our subject consumes 360 liters of oxygen per day. Knowing this, we can multiply her daily oxygen intake, 360 liters, by 4.86 calories, the number of calories burned from a typical mixed diet of carbs, proteins, and fats. We come up with an indirect calorimetric energy expenditure of roughly 1,750 calories burned per day, just at rest. Now, this 1,750 calories doesn't include the energy this woman would need to digest food, walk around, or exercise. So you can see that she would want to eat above 1,750 calories to account for these other daily activities to stay in energy balance. And most universities will offer this type of service if you're interested in an evaluation for yourself. They can give you some detailed numbers to understand exactly what your resting metabolic rate is. Luckily for us, there are also many good predictive equations that have been developed to estimate energy expenditure. These equations are based upon many things like age, sex, height, weight, and daily activity levels. These formulas are an excellent place to start to give a practical estimate when used properly. Some commonly used metabolic equations include the Harris-Benedict equation and the Cunningham equation. The Harris-Benedict equation differentiates between males and females and uses height, weight, and age to evaluate metabolic rate. What I like about the Cunningham equation is that it also takes into account your lean body mass. There are just two of many predictive equation possibilities. When these equations are used, the value given indicates the person's resting metabolic rate when he or she is not doing any exercise. So the resting value then needs to be multiplied by an activity factor to get the actual daily needs that account for exercise and activity patterns that you normally take part in. Activity factors range from about 1.2 to 2.0. For example, you would multiply by 1.3 for sedentary people or those just doing very light activity. But you would multiply by 1.7 for people who exercise daily at a moderate to high intensity. And you would multiply by 2.0 or more for very hard exercise training and people who work out more than once per day to estimate their calorie needs. So the coefficient is larger for those who do more exercise, which makes sense. It is important to remember that these equations are only estimations. Metabolism is constantly changing based upon needs of the individual. So it's important to reevaluate a person's nutrition plan based upon performance, body weight, and body composition over time. So now that you know how we calculate energy expenditure, or the calories used for rest and for activity, we need to consider how this fits into the energy balance equation. Now remember that energy balance is where the food calories that you take in match the calories that you expend or burn. So the next step is to consider and evaluate all of the major components of what makes up your total daily energy expenditure, or all of the calories that you burn in a day. Well, earlier I mentioned that total daily energy expenditure is made up of 3 components. However, in this lecture, we'll talk about 4 components that contribute to your total daily energy expenditure. These are your resting metabolic rate, your thermic effect of food, which is the amount of energy required to digest the food you eat, your thermic effect of activity, which is the energy expended doing activities like working out or working around the house, and 4 would be your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, which includes unplanned activity like tapping your feet or bouncing your knees. Of the components of our total daily energy expenditure, by far the largest one that I mentioned is your resting metabolic rate. See, resting metabolic rate is defined as the energy required to maintain the systems of your body at rest. About 60 to 80% of the oxygen you consume and the calories you burn goes to just keeping you alive at rest. For very active people, resting metabolic rate may make up less of your total energy expenditure as a percentage because physical activity likely makes up a much larger portion of total energy use in your day. Many factors influence resting metabolic rate, including age, sex, genetics, energy intake, whether you're fasted or fed, body size, lean body mass, body temperature, the climate that you're in, caffeine or nicotine consumption, and exercise. Clearly, there are some uncontrollable characteristics that play a part in determining it. The second component of total daily energy expenditure I mentioned is the thermic effect of food, which is defined as the energy required to digest, absorb, transport, metabolize, and store your food. Huge meals with high calorie counts have a larger thermic effect of food. We also know that protein-rich foods also have the greatest effect on increasing calorie burn, as they're the most difficult to digest and absorb, which is one reason added protein in the diet can be helpful for body composition. And finally, the last components of your total daily energy expenditure are the thermic effect of activity and non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. These include the energy cost of daily activities, including planned exercise, walking to work, or taking the stairs, and involuntary muscular activities like knee bouncing, toe tapping, or fidgeting. Obviously, the amount of exercise and activity you do will determine how much of the role thermic effect of activity, or NEAT, plays in your overall energy expenditure. For most people who do not exercise much at all, then TEA might make up about 10 to 15% of your total daily energy expenditure. But if you're really exercising a lot, this could be upwards of 30%. Seems like a reason enough to try and fit exercise into your day, right? You've probably also heard that exercise will increase your metabolism. Well, it definitely will increase oxygen consumption, and it can do so for a few hours, up to a few days after you finish exercising, if done properly. Interestingly, if you exercise regularly for a few weeks or years, and then stop for some reason for an extended period of time, your resting metabolism can also decrease. We have even shown that after collegiate swimmers stopped swimming for 5 weeks, they had a significant 7% decrease in resting metabolic rate. So it is important to maintain your great exercise habits for life. Now that you understand the energy balance equation, I'm sure that you can identify 1 or 2 habits in your lifestyle that you can modify to improve one of these aspects of energy balance. In fact, energy imbalances, like eating even just slightly more calories than you expend, can translate to significant weight gain over time. Usually, this is how weight gain sneaks up on us. And it's not just noticeable when the